fellow who said, my ambition in life is to become a vice president at my own company, because that meant that the company had outgrown him, and his skills were only suited for one particular function. So you've got to really understand and have a realistic assessment of your own skills. And your jobs as entrepreneurs is not to lead things, not to run things, but to assemble resources that can, in the aggregate, do something really good. Okay, now, these are all the things you can do wrong. What can you do right? Let's not start off on too negative a note this early in the morning. So what are the 5 best qualities of successful entrepreneurs and founders? The first, most of you will understand, which is believe that you can make a difference. If you think, oh, this will never work, or everybody's against me, it's just not going to happen. You have to believe that you can make a difference. Second is that you have to have a passion for making things happen. This is what I call an action bias. An acquaintance, an old friend of mine, is Nolan Bushnell. How many people know Nolan Bushnell? Good, very good. He knows everybody. Nolan's quite a character. To me, he's one of the most amazing people in the Silicon Valley, one of the great unsung heroes of his time. Most of you would probably have known him, have contact unknowingly with him, as the founder of, was it Chuck E. Cheese Pizza Time Theaters? It's an amazing idea that he came up with. He's also known as father of the computer game business, because he founded Atari, which many of you may remember. And he once said something really interesting. He said, everyone who has ever taken a shower has had an idea. But it's the person who gets out of the shower, dries off, and does something about it that makes a difference. So there's a big difference between just being smart and knowing things. In my opinion, that's not very valuable. It's about doing things. It's about getting off your butt and giving it a try. You really need, as a founder, to exhibit what I call urgent patience. I was reminded of the story of a old English, what do they call it? Royalty, whatever. That woman, now we can talk about Downton Abbey. Imagine at Downton Abbey, the mistress of the house, I forgot her name. Anyway, this woman came out and was talking to one of the gardeners and had asked him to plant a tree in a particular spot. And he hadn't done it yet. And she said, why haven't you done this? And he said, madam, it's going to take 100 years for that tree to grow. And her reaction was, well, good Lord, you better get on it right away. That's what I call urgent patience. The third best characteristic is unjustifiable optimism. Your job as the leader of the startup is to be perpetually optimistic, no matter how ridiculous that might be. You have to have no fear. You have to have courage to try things and not be afraid of failure. Now, this is true. Many of the most successful entrepreneurs that I've talked to, people that many of you have heard of or read about or may know, have told me privately, they say, you know, if I knew what I know now, what it was going to take to do what I did, I never would have done it. So the fourth element of quality of a good founder is to have an incredible tolerance for uncertainty. People hate uncertainty. You have to learn how to live with uncertainty. If you're the kind of person who's in a big rush and it's the end of your semester and you can go to your course or your teacher and pick up that final exam paper and you don't have time to take a look and see what your grade is and you rush around all day and you can wait till you get home and then open it up and see what your grade is. That's the ability to live with uncertainty. Very important characteristic that I find with successful entrepreneurs. And the fifth is you really have to care about the other people that you work with. The interesting thing about that is In my experience, you can't fake that. You have to really, really care. And that's one of the best characteristics that I've seen in successful entrepreneurs. Okay, there are 5 critical skills that I found that entrepreneurs need. The first is leadership. Now, that sounds like every motivational speaker you've ever heard. But let me tell you what I have found out about leadership. Leadership is not about making plans. It's not about setting direction. That's just management. Leadership is building consensus in the face of adversity and uncertainty. And it is an interpersonal skill. It's something that's very hard to learn. Either you have this characteristic or you do not. When things are going well, you don't really need leadership. It's a question of what you do when things aren't going well that matters. You have to be able to motivate people to conquer their fears, to put the common good ahead of their own opinions, especially when people disagree. I learned this from a fellow by the name of Bill Campbell, where I watched him lead, and it was just a breathtaking, remarkable thing. Does everybody know who Bill Campbell is? A few people. He is one of the most important people, unsung heroes of the Silicon Valley. He probably would not want me disclosing this, but he's not up at this hour. I don't want to hear this. But he's one of the driving forces today behind Apple Computer and Google, and meets regularly with management of both companies. He teaches leadership, and he's one of the greatest leaders that I've ever had the pleasure to work with. Communication is way, way harder than you might believe, particularly in a startup. You might think, well, I've only got 7 people. How hard could it be to communicate with 7 people? But it's actually harder in a small group where there isn't already structure and process in place than it is in a much larger organization, in a place like Oracle or Facebook. The problem is that everybody has to know their job and understand how it contributes to the goals of the organization. When I was managing startups, I was potentially doing what I called connecting the dots. I would take one person over here from one department who was doing customer service, and another person over here who was doing product development, and I'd make them talk to each other. And say, this is the problems that the person in customer service is seeing. What are you going to do about it? So each person began to understand how their work was affecting other people in the organization. Making sure that everybody understood their role in bringing that alive is one of the key characteristics and skills that you need as a leader, as an entrepreneur. What am I up to? The third critical skill is knowing when to make a decision. Now, everybody understands that you have to make decisions, but many people don't understand that more important than actually making a decision is to know when is the right time to make a decision. This is something you need to be considering as you go about your management work. An amateur, somebody without experience, is overwhelmed by all of the things that are bombarding them. And what they tend to do is want to make decisions too early, before it's necessary to do so, and before they have the best information available to make that happen. And the reason they do this is they want to simplify. They're overwhelmed by all of the inputs that they're getting. On the contrary, I've seen the opposite problem with perfectionists. Perfectionists don't want to make a decision until they are sure that they're going to be right, until they have all the information that they can get. And often, that causes you to procrastinate making a decision until it's too late, so that your people and you don't have time to implement whatever that decision is, or the environment may change by the time that decision gets made. It is often the case that you are better off making a bad decision and then being able to correct it later than not making a decision at all. The fourth skill is about teamwork and trust and delegation and support. You have to know when to lead and when to follow. When I was CEO of various startups and companies. The way in which I dealt with that was to think of myself always not as better or different than everybody else in the company, but to think of myself as an employee of the company. I had my job to do just as everybody else had their job to do. And as a leader, you have to take the attitude that no job in the company is beneath you. I remember one company that I co-founded, one of the minor little problems that we had was the kitchen was always full of dirty dishes. This is probably true at home for many of you, particularly if you have children like I do. So one day, I didn't like the fact there were dirty dishes in the kitchen. I went in there and I did the dishes. And people would wander by and they noticed that I was doing the dishes. So somebody came in and asked me, why are you doing the dishes? You know, you're the CEO of the company. I said, the dishes need doing. And from that day on, the kitchen was never dirty because everybody in the company understood that regardless of what your job title said, regardless of what you thought you were doing, if something needed to get done, it was okay to go and do it. That you also had a responsibility to engage in activities in the company that would help the company that were not part of your job description. And the fifth critical skill is what I call telescoping. Some people are always down in the details, and that's a mistake. Some people are never down in the details, and you're just looking at the big picture with their head in the clouds. And that's a mistake also. The ability to telescope is to be able to dive in and deal with that detail on your website to make sure that those links are working. And then to be able to pull back and say, well, where is this whole industry going? And what strategies and what resources do I need to put into place today in order to get to the result that we're seeking to have? The ability to pull in and pull out, pull in and pull out like that, that's what I call telescoping. So, in the interest of trying to keep us a little bit on schedule here, you say, oh no, we don't have to do that. I have to remind the person who's supposed to hold up the time cards to do it. That's great. I'm sorry, how far have I gone? I have 10 minutes left. Have you seen my... I will not use my 10 minutes. I want to give you a little bit of parting advice by making an observation. And that is, it's really a peculiar thing, but companies reflect the personalities of their founders. If you look at a company like Microsoft, some of you might have met or know Bill Gates, it has his personality. Sort of the Richard Nixon of the computer industry. I am not a crook. Problem in the modern world is now that's going to be all over the internet. Bill, I'm sorry, I'm just making a joke. If you know Oracle, and if you know Larry Ellison, Oracle has his personality. More contemporary companies like Facebook, as you're probably aware, really has Mark Zuckerberg's personality. So my caution to you is this, if you start a company. Consider very carefully what you want to see when you look into the giant mirror that will be your company. So I'll leave you with that as a parting thought, and in the interest of keeping us on track, I thank you very much.